American tourism is booming in some places and completely ignored in others. While Florida hit 143 million visitors in 2024 and New York pulled in nearly 10 million from overseas alone, there are states that might as well have put up a closed sign. This is why American tourism is dying. Nobody wants to visit these 9 empty states. The concentration problem. Before getting into the states themselves, the bigger picture here is worth understanding. In 2024, the United States received 48.9 million international visitors from overseas, excluding Canada and Mexico. That sounds like a lot. And then you look at where those visitors actually went. 4 states, New York, Florida, California, and Nevada, captured 57% of all overseas visitors. That means 28.3 million of 48.9 million international tourists went to those 4 states. The other 46 states split the remaining 43% among themselves. Some of them split very little. West Virginia and North Dakota received so few overseas visitors that their numbers weren't even formally reported in the National Travel and Tourism Office data. The states at the bottom of the list, Delaware, Nebraska, and Mississippi, each received around 42,000 to 49,000 international visitors for the entire year. For context, some individual hotels in Las Vegas see that many guests in a single week. This concentration isn't new, but it is intensifying. Travel habits are driven by awareness, and awareness is driven by what appears on social media, in travel guides, and in popular culture. The states and cities that already dominate those channels keep pulling visitors, the ones that don't continue to fade from the conversation. It's also worth noting the domestic picture. Domestic tourism, Americans traveling within their own country, shows similar patterns of concentration, though less extreme. States like Florida, California, New York, and Texas dominate domestic visitor counts as well. The states on this list struggle to attract their own countrymen, let alone international visitors. The challenge of drawing visitors from overseas, when you can barely draw visitors from neighboring states, is one that several of these states are actively confronting. And for the states on this list, fading from the conversation is an understatement. Number 9. West Virginia. West Virginia receives the fewest international tourists of any state in the country by a significant margin. Just 3,223 international visitors recorded in a recent study, equating to 182 visitors per 100,000 residents. That's the lowest rate in the nation. The paradox here is real. West Virginia has things that should attract people. New River Gorge National Park, designated as the country's newest national park in 2020, is a genuinely spectacular canyon, carved by one of the oldest rivers in North America. The whitewater rafting on the New and Gauley rivers is among the best in the eastern United States. The state's Appalachian mountain scenery is dramatic, and the fall foliage rivals New England's. So why does nobody go? A combination of factors makes West Virginia a particularly hard sell. The state's image is dominated by a long, painful economic narrative: coal industry decline, high poverty rates, the opioid crisis. These are real and serious issues, but they have calcified into a perception of the state that makes it difficult for tourism marketing to break through. When a destination's primary cultural association in the national imagination is decline and hardship, telling people to come visit for the scenery is an uphill battle. The infrastructure challenges are also real. West Virginia has no major international airports. The highway network is limited by the mountain terrain. Getting there from most of the country requires genuine effort. For domestic tourists, it sits in an awkward geographic position, close enough to the major East Coast population centers that it might seem like a quick trip, far enough by actual driving time that many people choose the beach instead. The state has made deliberate efforts to reposition its tourism identity around outdoor adventure. The New River Gorge region has become a legitimate gathering point for rock climbers, mountain bikers, and whitewater rafting enthusiasts. The designation of New River Gorge as a national park in 2020 was a meaningful moment. National park status brings infrastructure investment, national park service marketing, and a kind of legitimacy that state park status doesn't carry in the same way. Early data after the redesignation showed increases in visitor numbers, Whether that momentum translates into the kind of mainstream awareness that changes a state's tourism trajectory remains to be seen. "It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been," said one travel writer who visited New River Gorge. "And when I told people I was going to West Virginia, every single one of them asked why." That question, why West Virginia, is the obstacle. For a destination to attract visitors, it needs a compelling answer to that question that can travel through social networks faster than the misconceptions about the place. Number 8. North Dakota. North Dakota follows closely behind West Virginia, with just 2,316 international visitors recorded, translating to about 288 per 100,000 residents. Domestic tourism is higher but still among the lowest in the country. The state welcomed 25.6 million visitors in 2025, a 2.6% decrease from the prior year, driven largely by a 23.9% drop in Canadian border crossings. The geography of North Dakota's tourism problem is almost elegant in its logic. The state is not on the way to anywhere that draws large numbers of travelers. It sits in the northern Great Plains, without coastal access, without major mountain ranges, without the historical mythology that drives visitors to states like Virginia or Massachusetts. Popular travel routes tend to bypass it entirely. The state's tourism director noted in 2025 that a significant portion of the tourism decline was driven by a nearly 24% drop in Canadian border crossings, illustrating just how dependent North Dakota's visitor economy is on its single largest source of neighboring traffic. The weather compounds the problem considerably. North Dakota has some of the harshest winters in the continental United States. Long, frigid winters with heavy snowfall and wind chills that regularly drop well below zero make a significant portion of the year inhospitable for most tourists. The tourist season is real but narrow. There are genuine attractions. Theodore Roosevelt National Park in the state's western Badlands is a legitimately beautiful landscape with outstanding wildlife viewing. Wild horses, bison, and elk are commonly seen there. The International Peace Garden on the Canadian border is a unique binational park. The Knife River Indian Villages National Historic Site preserves one of the most significant Native American cultural sites on the Great Plains. But none of these has broken into the mainstream travel conversation in the way that parks in Utah, Wyoming, or South Dakota have. Name recognition drives tourism, and North Dakota's major attractions have never achieved the widespread recognition they'd need to compete with the national parks that are already on everyone's list. Number 7. Mississippi. Mississippi received 49,000 international visitors in 2024, tying with Nebraska for the second lowest number of overseas arrivals in the country. Only Delaware received fewer. The state's tourism challenges are layered and complicated. Mississippi has genuine cultural significance that deserves far more attention than it gets. The Mississippi Delta is the birthplace of the blues, a musical tradition that shaped virtually all of American popular music in the 20th century. Robert Johnson, Muddy Waters, B.B. King, John Lee Hooker, Howlin' Wolf, all of them came from this land. The cultural heritage trail through the Delta, including the Mississippi Blues Trail with its hundreds of historical markers documenting specific people and places, is extraordinary for anyone who understands what happened here. The state also has the Natchez Trace Parkway, a 444-mile scenic drive following an ancient path used by Native Americans, explorers, and settlers, one of the most historically dense drives in the country. Vicksburg National Military Park is one of the most significant Civil War sites anywhere in the United States, preserving the siege lines where the Union campaign to control the Mississippi River reached its climax in 1863. The coastal town of Ocean Springs has a genuinely charming art scene. Natchez preserves one of the largest collections of antebellum plantation architecture in the United States. The problem is that visiting Mississippi requires confronting its history in ways that some tourists find uncomfortable, and in ways that the state itself has not always engaged with honestly or fully. The plantation tourism around Natchez has been criticized for presenting a sanitized view of slavery that omits the people who were enslaved there. That conversation is slowly changing, but the progress has been uneven. The state also removed the Confederate battle emblem from its state flag in 2020, a change that was overdue, but also reflected decades during which that symbol's presence had complicated Mississippi's national image. Beyond the historical complications, Mississippi also suffers from a general perception problem that is difficult to quantify, but very real to anyone who follows American cultural conversations. The state consistently ranks near the bottom of national indices for income, education, and health outcomes. These realities have shaped a national image that doesn't naturally invite recreational travel, and that image is hard to change through tourism marketing alone. Number 6. Delaware. Delaware is the smallest state in the country by land area, 2,489 square miles, and the second smallest by population, around 1 million residents. It received just 42,000 international visitors in 2024, the lowest absolute number of any state in the nation. Some of Delaware's tourism challenge is simply a function of size. A state that's small has physical limits on how many overnight visitors it can accommodate and how many distinct attractions it can host. But the deeper issue is that Delaware is, for most Americans, a state they pass through rather than a state they visit. It sits between Philadelphia and the Maryland beaches, and for most drivers on I-95, Delaware is the stretch of highway between the Delaware Memorial Bridge and the Maryland state line, a toll, some billboards, and a short stretch of countryside. Delaware does have things to offer. Rehoboth Beach is a genuinely pleasant Atlantic Ocean resort town that draws a significant summer crowd from Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Philadelphia. The state's beaches are clean, and the town has a lively dining and art scene that has grown substantially over the past 2 decades. The Brandywine Valley, shared with Pennsylvania, has a concentration of museums and historic estates. The DuPont family's Winterthur Museum holds one of the finest collections of American decorative arts in the country, and the Delaware Art Museum has significant holdings of pre-Raphaelite works and American illustration. The state has the distinction of being the first to ratify the United States Constitution on December 7, 1787, and brands itself as the first state accordingly. This historical identity is somewhat difficult to build a tourism campaign around, though. Being first to ratify a document in 1787 is a proud distinction that does not, in practice, move significant numbers of people to book a hotel room. Delaware also has a peculiar relationship with corporate identity. More than 2/3 of Fortune 500 companies are incorporated there due to favorable business law that gives it significant economic weight entirely disproportionate to its physical and cultural profile. It is, in a real sense, a major state for business and a ghost state for leisure, and that asymmetry defines how most Americans think about it, if they think about it at all. Number 5. Nebraska. Nebraska received 49,000 international visitors in 2024, tied with Mississippi near the bottom of the rankings. The state's image problem is well documented and fairly specific. Most people who haven't been to Nebraska believe it is entirely flat cornfields, and the state's marketing has historically struggled to counter that perception. The flat cornfields reputation is not entirely wrong. Nebraska does have a lot of flat land and a lot of corn. It is the 3rd largest corn producer in the United States, but it is also genuinely wrong about the western half of the state, which is high plains and sandhills country, a landscape of a completely different character than the eastern farm belt. The Sandhills region in north-central Nebraska is one of the most distinctive landscapes in the country. Rolling grass-covered dunes, stabilized by vegetation, dotted with thousands of small lakes and wetlands, largely empty of human settlement, and home to one of the most significant annual wildlife events in North America. Every spring, roughly 1 million sandhill cranes, approximately 80% of the entire global population, gather along the Platte River Valley during their migration north. It is one of the great wildlife spectacles in North America, and most Americans have never heard of it. Chimney Rock, the iconic natural landmark that guided westward emigrants on the Oregon Trail, rises 300 feet above the North Platte River Valley. The Scotts Bluff National Monument preserves the bluffs that served as a landmark for wagon trains. Carhenge, a recreation of Stonehenge built from junked automobiles near Alliance, Nebraska, is the kind of thing that shouldn't exist, but does, and is more interesting than it has any right to be. None of this travels well in the national travel conversation, because Nebraska doesn't have a cultural moment, a viral destination, or an anchor attraction that commands the same kind of attention as Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon. It is overlooked, and in a media environment where attention determines visitor flows, being overlooked is almost impossible to recover from without a significant investment in marketing and a compelling story to tell. Nebraska has tried various approaches over the years. The State Tourism Board's campaigns have highlighted its outdoor experiences, its roadside curiosities, and its historical significance as the pathway through which the great westward migrations of the 19th century passed. The state also has a genuinely unusual number of billionaires per capita. Warren Buffett lives in Omaha and has lived in the same house there for decades. And Omaha itself is a more interesting city than its reputation suggests, with a respected zoo considered one of the best in the country and a growing restaurant scene. None of this has broken through into the mainstream travel conversation in the way that a state's tourism economy requires. Number 4, Alaska. Alaska is consistently ranked as the least visited state by total annual visitors, just 3.05 million in 2023 to 2024, which is less than many individual theme parks draw in a summer. Half of those visitors arrived by cruise ship. The reasons are straightforward but worth examining. The fundamental challenge is logistical. Alaska is not connected to the continental United States by road in a way that most travelers can easily navigate. The Alaska Highway through Canada, the only land route, is more than 1,300 miles of highway through remote wilderness, and it requires crossing an international border, carrying significant fuel and emergency supplies, and accepting that if something goes wrong, help is not nearby. It is a genuine adventure, but not the spontaneous weekend trip that most tourism runs on. Most people visit Alaska by air or by cruise ship. The cruise ship model of Alaskan tourism is worth examining on its own terms. Approximately 1.5 million of those 3 million annual visitors experience Alaska primarily from the deck of a ship, stopping in port towns like Juneau, Ketchikan, and Skagway for a few hours before sailing on. These visitors see Alaska's coast, its glaciers, and its wildlife in a way that is genuinely moving. They also see it through a bubble of ship infrastructure and organized shore excursions that filters out much of the challenge and much of the rawness of being in Alaska. A cruise ship visit to Alaska is a beautiful, expensive, and fundamentally comfortable way of seeing a place that is fundamentally not comfortable. The cost of reaching Alaska meaningfully is significant. Flights from the continental U.S. are expensive by domestic standards. Once there, food and supplies cost more than most of the country. The remote logistics of supply chains in a state separated from the lower 48 are reflected directly in retail prices. Multiple travelers have noted that the money required to visit Alaska meaningfully would buy a significant trip to Europe or beyond. The weather also constrains the tourist season severely. Alaska is best visited between late May and early September. Outside those months, much of the state is dark, cold, or both. That concentrates whatever visitor demand exists into a short window. Number 3, Iowa. Iowa received 67,000 international visitors in 2024, ranking it among the least visited states in the country. The state's tourism challenges are a classic case of image disconnect. What Iowa actually has to offer and what most people imagine when they hear the word Iowa are very different things. Iowa is, in the national imagination, corn and soybeans and flatland. And the Iowa caucuses, which famously drew enormous media attention every 4 years before the Democratic Party moved its nominating calendar in 2024. Outside of presidential primary season and the Field of Dreams movie site near Dyersville, most Americans would struggle to name a reason to visit. The Field of Dreams site, built for the 1989 Kevin Costner film, and later expanded into a professional baseball venue hosting an annual MLB game, has become a genuine pilgrimage destination for a specific audience. Major League Baseball began playing regular season games there in 2021, and the event draws sellout crowds and national television coverage. For 1 week a year, a cornfield in Dyersville, Iowa is one of the more talked-about sports venues in America. The rest of the year, it returns to being a cornfield in Dyersville, Iowa. The state's actual tourism offerings are not spectacular by national standards, but they are real. The Mississippi River bluffs in eastern Iowa are genuinely beautiful. The Los Hills in western Iowa, a rare geological formation found elsewhere only in China, form an unusual and dramatic landscape virtually unknown outside the state. Iowa City has a genuine literary culture, as home to the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop, one of the most prestigious creative writing programs in the world. The Cedar Rapids Museum of Art holds a significant collection of Grant Wood paintings, and Wood's American Gothic is one of the most recognized images in American art history. But tourism destinations require a narrative, a story that travelers tell each other about why a place is worth going. Iowa doesn't have a widely shared version of that story. It sits in the interior of the country, not on any major tourist corridor, not adjacent to any destination that draws significant overflow visitors. People drive through Iowa to get somewhere else, and that's always going to be a difficult position from which to build a tourism economy. Number 2, Oklahoma. Oklahoma received 77,000 international visitors in 2024, equating to about 1,866 tourists per 100,000 residents. For a state of nearly 4 million people, that's a strikingly low number. And the reasons for it illustrate a different kind of tourism problem than West Virginia or North Dakota face. Oklahoma isn't suffering from extreme weather or logistical inaccessibility. It has an international airport in Oklahoma City with direct connections to major hubs. The state is not particularly remote. The issue is visibility, a combination of geography, history, and image that has kept Oklahoma largely off the radar for both domestic and international travelers. The state has genuine cultural offerings that deserve wider recognition. Oklahoma is home to more Native American tribal nations than any other state. 39 federally recognized tribes maintain their nations within the state's borders. The cultural richness this represents, museums, festivals, languages, traditions, is extraordinary and almost completely unknown to most American tourists. The Chickasaw Cultural Center near Sulphur and the Cherokee Heritage Center near Tahlequah are world-class cultural institutions that receive a fraction of the attention they deserve. The National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City is one of the finest museums of its kind in the country. Route 66 passes through Oklahoma from its beginning in Chicago to its end in Los Angeles. More original Route 66 mileage runs through Oklahoma than through any other state. The Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum, built on the site of the April 19, 1995 bombing that killed 168 people, is a sobering and important place that deserves more recognition as a significant American historical site. Oklahoma sits in the south-central United States, sandwiched between Texas, which draws far more visitors, and other plain states. It doesn't benefit from coastal geography, iconic mountain landscapes, or a major city with global name recognition. What it has is real but quiet, and quiet doesn't win in the competition for tourist attention. The state has never had its cultural moment, and until it does, the visitors who would genuinely appreciate what it offers will largely keep going somewhere else instead. Number 1. Kansas. Kansas, like Nebraska and Iowa, suffers from the perception of being an empty middle American state that people drive across rather than visit. The numbers reflect this. Kansas ranks consistently near the bottom of tourism metrics by state, drawing far fewer visitors than its geographic position and size might suggest. It receives only around 100,000 to 130,000 international visitors annually, a figure that places it solidly in the bottom tier of states. The state's association with tornadoes, cemented in the American imagination by The Wizard of Oz, which is based in Kansas and has generated decades of tornado imagery attached to the state, has created a specific deterrence that most states don't face. Kansas does sit in Tornado Alley, and the state does experience a significant number of tornadoes annually, but severe weather is a reality throughout the central United States, and the Kansas Pacific Association has given the state a distinctive negative brand that it struggles to overcome. What Kansas actually offers is, again, underestimated. The Flint Hills in eastern Kansas form one of the largest remaining areas of intact tallgrass prairie on Earth. a landscape that once covered 170 million acres across North America and now survives in only a tiny fraction of its original range. The Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve protects a portion of this ecosystem, and the spring wildflower blooms and vast, uninterrupted horizons are legitimately dramatic. Monument Rocks in western Kansas, ancient chalk formations rising from the prairie, are genuinely spectacular and almost entirely unknown outside the state. Dodge City carries a legendary place in American Western history. The Boot Hill Museum reconstructs the famous frontier town where lawmen like Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson served. The Kansas Cosmosphere in Hutchinson houses one of the largest collections of space artifacts outside the Smithsonian, including the actual Apollo 13 command module. These are not nothing, but they are not the Grand Canyon. And in American tourism, the distance between not nothing and a place I'm going to spend money to visit can be insurmountable without the right cultural moment or the right story reaching the right audience. As one travel writer observed, Kansas is the kind of state where you keep waiting for it to reveal its secret, and then you realize the emptiness and the silence might actually be the secret. The bigger picture. What connects these 9 states and the broader pattern of American tourism concentration is a feedback loop that is very difficult to interrupt. The places that are already famous draw visitors, which generates photos, reviews, and social media content, which makes them more famous, which draws more visitors. The places that are not famous generate none of that organic amplification, and without it, even significant marketing investment struggles to move the needle. The data is stark. 4 states capturing 57% of all overseas visitors, while the bottom 5 states share between 42,000 and 77,000 visitors each for an entire year. The economic consequences extend beyond the tourism industry itself. Communities that could support jobs, restaurants, hotels, and local businesses from visitor spending simply don't. There is also a broader story about what this concentration means for American tourism as a cultural phenomenon. When the majority of domestic and international visitors experience the United States through only 4 or 5 states, they are experiencing a very specific version of the country, primarily coastal, primarily urban, primarily built around the same handful of landmark attractions. The rest of the country, its landscapes, its histories, its regional cultures, remains invisible to a significant portion of people who would otherwise be interested in it. The American tourism industry has a structural incentive to promote the places that already attract visitors, because those destinations have the infrastructure to handle large visitor volumes, the hospitality industry built around tourism, and the marketing budgets to sustain their own visibility. States at the bottom of the rankings often lack all 3. For the traveler willing to do the work, to plan around destinations without well-worn tourist infrastructure, to accept that not every restaurant will be open until 9 p.m., and not every experience will have been reviewed on TripAdvisor. The states on this list offer something that the most visited states genuinely cannot: the experience of being somewhere that hasn't been processed and packaged for mass consumption. For the 35-plus traveler who has already been to the obvious places and is genuinely looking for something different: West Virginia's New River Gorge, Nebraska's Crane Migration, the indigenous cultural sites of Oklahoma, the untouched tallgrass prairie of Kansas. These states offer exactly the kind of unhurried, uncrowded, genuinely surprising travel that the most visited states no longer provide. The irony is real. The states nobody visits are often the ones where something real is still waiting to be found. If this made you reconsider a state you've never thought about visiting, or confirmed something you've always suspected about American travel, hit the like button and subscribe. We post every week on the places behind the headlines and the numbers behind the maps.